Just the first few minutes of this workshop, just to tell you about the Venture Programme. And then I'll then introduce Nerys Llywelyn Jones, who is a solicitor with Agri Advisor Solicitors, who's going to go through the different business models that you can consider for setting up joint ventures. So the Venture Programme, as I said, is a land matching service. There is also similar schemes running outside of Wales. So there's the Fresh Start programme. There's pop-ups there for Fresh Start, and Alison Rickett is here today as well. So if anybody from England wants more information, come and find us. Also, of course, there's the Land Mobility Service running in Northern Ireland, and John McAllister, who runs that programme, is also here today. But I'm going to focus mainly on the Welsh scheme. So essentially, Venture takes people on a journey through a package of support that's available through Farming Connect. So people come in looking for a business partner, so they use the matchmaking element of the programme. It's basically like a dating service, really, for farmers. And then after the matchmaking element, there's also a package of the usual sort of knowledge transfer services available through Farming Connect. So you've got the training, the events, the courses and things that are run, technical advice, open days on demonstration farms, etc. that you can all tap into. There's also then more tailored support, such as agri-scope groups, so you can get into a group with people looking for similar opportunities to you. You can get mentoring, so you can get a mentor who's been into a joint venture and has experience in that field, who can kind of guide you through the process. And there's all sorts of specific workshops that we run on joint ventures in particular. Once you're matched up then, so once you've found a business partner through the programme, there's then the option to have a fully funded business plan to map out exactly how the new joint venture is going to work, and also legal guidance is included in that to start drafting a joint venture agreement. So there's basically a lot of support there. It's fully funded. Which is great, really, and it really guides you along the whole journey from finding a business partner through to setting up and formalising that new business, and also the follow-on afterwards as well. So in terms of progress to date, programme's been running now for about 3 years, and those are a few stats really on how many people we've got involved in the scheme. So there are currently about 100 active seekers. So we call them active seekers because they've completed a profile, they've fully enrolled with the programme. A lot of people kind of show an interest, but they don't proceed to complete a profile. So until somebody completes a profile on the platform, they can't actually receive any opportunities. We don't share the landowner's profile with you. So that's really important to know. Currently, we've got 17 opportunities, 17 providers who are looking for a match. And then that middle bit there is the number of people that have actually found a match. So we're working with them now to form that business plan. And 19, I think it's 20 actually by this week. It was 19 last week. 20 new joint ventures have been completed. So 20 new entrants are now farming for the first time in a joint venture. So yeah, there's a map there showing the providers and the seekers, and also the matches that are in progress and completed. There's over 7,000 acres of land involved in the programme, and the average farm size is 207 acres. The next slide gives you a breakdown of the opportunities we've currently got being advertised. So you'll see there's a bit of variety. We've got 2 horticulture opportunities, so they are clearly the smallest opportunities that we've got on the list. We haven't got a dairy one at the moment. We had 3 or 4 dairy opportunities in the last quarter, but those have been snapped up. But I'm sure we'll have some more dairy opportunities coming on shortly. So there's a variety in size there. There's obviously, you can see that Aberystwyth one, that's 650 hectares there, a sheep farm near Aberystwyth. So yeah, if anybody's interested in any of these opportunities, the best thing to do is to enroll with the venture program, complete a profile, which is basically like a CV, and then follow the journey through really to setting up a new joint venture. I've got details there for you for the venture officers. So we've got Gwydion Owen in North Wales and Delyth Jones in South Wales. And just to remind you, if there's anybody here outside of Wales, unfortunately the venture programme is only delivered for those in Wales. But as mentioned at the beginning, there are similar schemes in England and Northern Ireland, and I believe there is one being developed at the moment in Scotland. So yeah, it's time now for me to introduce Dr Nerys Llywelyn Jones, a solicitor with Agri Advisors, and Nerys is going to go through a bit more detail with us really about the different joint venture business models you can consider and how each of them works. Okay?
Thank you very much. There we are. Okay, so my job is to take you through some of the different legal frameworks that are available when you're setting up a new joint venture. And I've not just concentrated on the joint venture side of it as well. I have looked at perhaps what self-employment looks like and what pay-as-you-earn looks like as well, because I think it's important to see the whole picture in terms of what you might be doing, and also you might be looking to employ, and the importance of kind of having other people work with you as well. So my first slide should be blank. There's one missing. So the first slide is blank, and the reason that's blank is because I think that you can start with a completely blank canvas, isn't it? There are no hard and fast rules as to how you set up a joint venture. Essentially, it comes down to discussing what the two parties that are involved in the venture want to achieve from it, and coming up with an agreement, a legal agreement that suits and meets those objectives. So very often, in terms of the starting process, we are starting with the business plan. So we go from that business plan and then we draft an agreement to fit that business plan, isn't it? Because we want to make sure that the business, first of all, makes sense in the viability terms, in practical terms, and then we look to drafting a legal agreement that makes that work and means that both parties get something from that agreement. And of course, that is a key point. Both parties have to have a benefit from that agreement. There has to be a mutual benefit, otherwise it doesn't work. If one party is gaining much more out of it than somebody else, then it doesn't make sense in practice. So I think it's really important as well to acknowledge that in terms of your discussions. It is also important to establish and to build trust within that relationship as well, isn't it? Because you need to make sure that that relationship is based on a very open and frank and honest discussion about what everybody's roles are within that business structure and what everybody's hoping to get out of it. And also, that enables you then to kind of move and choose the right model for you, because there are models out there, and I'll take you through some of those models. But those models don't have to be set in stone either. You can make tweaks and small changes to those models to make them fit you properly. And also, I put tax there because there are tax considerations as well for some of the models that you might want to choose, be that income tax considerations, capital gains tax considerations, and sometimes inheritance tax comes into the discussion as well in terms of making sure that that is preserved. So let's look at the different types of business structure that you can have, and let's have a look at what perhaps the advantages and disadvantages of them might be. So the first one I've got here is a self-employed contract for services. Okay, so that's when you provide a service to somebody else and you remain self-employed. And we've had examples of that this morning already. We've heard about contracting arrangements, which essentially means I'm providing you with a service, you pay me for that service. There are two separate businesses, two completely different businesses. One is the service provider, one perhaps would be the farming business as it would be traditionally known. You're not creating necessarily a new business, except for registering yourself as a self-employed business if that is the first time you are offering that service. And you invoice. So you invoice for the service that you provide. That goes to the person that's that you're providing that service to, and the relationship is established there. I could probably name a raft of people who work on a self-employed basis, invoice for their services, but have no contract in place for that relationship with the person that they're providing that service to. And if you want any continuity or security in terms of that contract, is really important to have that service contract drafted up. And we do those. So we do what we would call a contract for services document that documents what the relationship is between those two parties, what service is required, and what is going to be paid for that service. And some of those contract service arrangements do have bonus elements to them. So for example, you were talking about live weight gain, etc. There are some contracts where you would get an extra amount of money if you hit that, or if the milk spec hits a certain spec. So for example, we will have herdsmen sometimes working on these kind of contract for services type of arrangements. So they're not employees, they're self-employed, and they're providing that service. That also means that they are not exclusive to your business. If you're employing somebody who's self-employed, you can work in several different places, isn't it? Yeah, and that's quite an important factor of being self-employed, isn't it? You need to be earning your income from a number of different sources, which is different to being an employee. If you have somebody working for you or with you all of the time, then they are an employee essentially, and you need to make sure that you are following the regulatory requirements in relation to providing them with a proper employment contract and providing them with clear terms as to what their conditions of work are, making sure that they are clear about what their wage position are, and normally under a pay-as-you-earn model you would have a fixed wage. You can, however, have bonus schemes as well within that. You can have salary sacrifices within the pay-as-you-earn scheme. So, for example, you could have somebody being an employee of yours and having a salary sacrifice which allows them to purchase livestock. Yeah? So there's lots of different things that you could be doing using a pay-as-you-earn to start somebody's relationship with your farming business, or to enable you to begin a relationship with a farming business you'd like to perhaps progress within. Obviously, there's national insurance to be paid by the employer and the employee, and then income tax to be paid as well. And of course, there are employment rights which come with being an employee, which you must be aware of as well. So this then brings us on to contract farming. So by contract farming, I think it's a little bit more than just a contract for services that I was talking about earlier, okay? So this is actually a contract farming arrangement between two businesses. So you've got business one perhaps being on the farm here, and then business two, which is the business providing a service, or the business wanting to get a service from the business one over here. So the example there is contract rearing. So there's a contract there between the farmer who owns the cattle and cannot house them in the winter, and the farmer two who's retired and has spare cubicle housing. The farmer two is quite happy to look after the cattle for the winter period for a fixed sum or based on weight gain, so they have a contract between them to have that arrangement, isn't it? And that's a fixed contract with clarity in there about who gets what gain from that contract. So that's one example of contract farming. Another example of contract farming you'd find is in arable areas. So very often you will have arable farmers that contract farm vast areas of land, isn't it? They will have all the kit, they will have all the equipment that they are needing to do the harvesting, etc. And then they will make arrangements with a large number of farmers to contract farm those arable areas. License. What do I mean by a license? A license is the ability to use land on a non-exclusive basis. Okay? So when you take a license of something, you get the right to use it for a particular purpose, or you might have the right to take the grass off the top of it, but you don't have exclusive possession of that land. Okay? So that differs from a tenancy. So it's short-term, usually seasonal arrangement, and there is a myth out there by now that if you live in a farmhouse and you let your land out on a licence, you will still get agricultural property relief, which is the agricultural relief on your farmhouse. That is not the case. You are not actively farming if you live in the farmhouse and you let your land out on a licence, because that licence, land is being farmed by somebody else. Somebody else is grazing that land with livestock, etc. So if you are letting land out on a licence basis, those businesses are businesses which really need to be thinking about what they're doing in terms of inheritance tax provision, and they are opportunities for those that perhaps may want to be looking at opportunities in terms of farming. It also has implications in terms of BPS. In terms of the basic payment scheme at the moment, you can claim BPS if you are licensing land out, but not if you are letting it out on a tenancy. So that is one of the main reasons why people aren't letting them out on tenancies, isn't it? Share farming, again, no new business is created. So you've got business 1 over here and business 2 over there, okay? The farm is in the middle. There's no new business being created in the share farming arrangement. Essentially, the contract is between business 1 and business 2. So you might imagine business 1 is somebody looking to come into farming. Business 2 might be the farm owner, okay? So they're 2 separate businesses. No new business is created as far as HMRC is concerned. No new farm CPH is created or whatever. It's the same CPH as business 2 has that you utilise. So it's no new business, but essentially you're creating a contract for farming that farm on a joint basis and in a shared way. Okay. An example I've got is one on sheep. It's quite interesting, all the dairy examples have kind of gone as well in terms of the opportunities. But I've got an example in terms of sheep, because I think it's nice sometimes to look at a different example as opposed to dairy. So you've got business 1 here, who might be a sole trader. He owns the farm, has 500 breeding ewes, 120 ewe lambs. He submits a SAF, that's our Welsh BPS form. Lives in the farmhouse, wants to stay living in the farmhouse. That's quite important to them. Okay. Machinery, happy to pay for fencing, building repairs, reseeding, insurance of buildings, etc. And wants to help out. This isn't somebody that doesn't want to be out on the farm, or doesn't want to be in the market, or doesn't want to be not involved in the farming business at all. If you don't want to farm, let the land out. Yeah? If you want to be involved in the farming business, this is one way that you can do it. Share farming works. Business 2, partnership of mother, father and son. So not a sole trader on their own, but an existing farming business which has probably already got its own tenancy or its own farm that it's farming, etc., but is looking to scale up or expand and can't do that without, without some kind of partnership or working together with another farmer. Happy to provide the labour requirements, happy to pay for vet meds and doses, pays for fertiliser, lime, so all the things that have a direct impact on what your profitability is. Public liability insurance, they just need to extend their existing one. It's just extending the existing policy that they've got already. Equipment, machinery, they've got a little bit of that. They may decide that they want to pay for tack, that's adjustment. I call it tack, but yeah, adjustment or outwintering or off-wintering livestock. And pays for feed, straw and bedding, isn't it? And then what they split in the middle, they split the BPS, the fat lambs, the wool, the cull ewes and any surplus silage. That's essentially your outputs on a sheep farm. What do you think the split should be between those two? Percentage terms of what's there at the bottom there. 50-50? Yeah? Any other offers? Because there's no hard and fast rule, is there? It depends on what the position for those particular businesses are. Now, I have seen ones where this business takes 10% and that business takes 90%. And the other way around. Because it depends on their personal circumstances and what they're looking to achieve from the relationship. This business, maybe the sole aim is to be able to live in the farmhouse, maintain the agricultural property from the farmhouse and have an asset that they can pass on to their children later on in life. That might be their main priority. Their main priority might be having somebody farm their land in a way that they have control over as well, as opposed to letting it out. So, they may not need an income from this farm. The business too has to have an income from this farm. There's no option for business to not to make this, because otherwise, why would they do it? So there has to be some income, or they have to be in a position where they are building equity in some way in terms of the flock, etc., for that business to be interested in this venture. Yeah, so it depends. There are no hard and fast rules as to how this is split, and to how this is kind of what the end result is. Then you've got a farming partnership. So partnerships make up, yeah. Yeah. It's a contract, essentially. It's an agreement, and we call them share farming agreements. So it's a document which sets out what the term of that agreement is, how long it's going to last for, how they can come out of it, who owns what, who does what, who pays for what. And normally we'll attach the business plan to the agreement. So Schedule 1 of the agreement is the business plan. And I think that's really important. You've got to follow your business plan. And you have to have mechanisms within your agreement for review of it. So there has to be an annual review. And there also has to be mechanisms for regular meetings as well, so that you're constantly changing or reviewing your position in terms of the farming model. Because a farming model for a dry winter is different to one for a wet winter, isn't it? You've got to have the ability to be flexible within it as well.
Sorry, so therefore, in terms of you said public liability insurance would be extended to business too. Forgive my ignorance, but if the interest in the land and everything sits with business one, it's a share farming, will that insurance actually cover?
It depends on the policy, doesn't it, how it's worded, and it might be that business one covers it, and I've put them on different sides there, but it doesn't have to be that business one pays for fencing.
Branch.
So
I just think what's important to realise with new entrants, so I look after the next generation group, so
I was going to say, I can't see who's asking me the question, so I started to think I got lost something. Sorry, yeah. So, again, there are no definite things as to which column different people have things in, isn't it? Which is why it has to be looked at in a bespoke way, I think, isn't it? Because, again, business one may not be able to provide much labour, but in some cases they will be able to provide a lot of labour. And sometimes it's not physical labour, it's also, management skills, it's other skills, it's bookkeeping skills, etc. So it doesn't have to be all labour as well in terms of what you need to run an effective business, is it? So I think there are lots of different things that come into the mix. Okay? Yeah. Take my contacts.
Where does the decision-making power ultimately lie between the two people? Is that in the contract, or is that down for discussion?
It's in the contract. So the contract will say this is how decisions are made, and normally one or other will have a casting vote. Okay, and that may be reflected in the profitability split as well, isn't it? The profit split, who has the casting vote and who takes more responsibility perhaps than the other. You have to have a casting vote, but most of the time it's a 50-50 decision-making process, isn't it? Except where there's a sticky issue, isn't it? And there might be certain vetoes that business one might want on certain decisions, and there might be certain vetoes that business two want on certain decisions. I think you have to write your agreement to fit with what the farming policy and the decision-making process on the farm needs to be. Any other questions on this? We can come back to share farming at the end as well. So one of the most common structures in terms of farming businesses is partnerships. And I think because it is so flexible, it's so easy to enter into a partnership. There's nothing much you really have to do. We have to say, oh, do you want to start a business with me? Should we sell this product, etc.? And we're going to make some money out of it. That's common purpose. We've set up a business, isn't it? Might need a bank account. Might need to tell HMRC. Probably need to tell Welsh Government. Bob's wrinkle, you're done. That's all you have to do. Yeah, you've set up a partnership agreement. There is no requirement for you to actually put that agreement into writing. Okay? Because there is a legislative backing provision for it. So the act that covers it is 1890. the Partnership Act 1890. I didn't get that wrong, okay, so mistake. 1890. 6 pages long, one of the shortest acts I work with, isn't it? Because they're all hundreds of pages now, isn't it? But 6 pages long. The 1890 Act dictates how a partnership is regulated or dealt with, isn't it? Unless there is a written agreement which says something different. Okay? Now, what you need to know about that 1890 Act is if any partner wants to leave that business at any point in time, they can do so, and they can require the whole lot to be sold up. If a partner dies, the partnership has to be wound up. Okay? Now, you do not want to be in that position. So if you are going to create a business structure with somebody on the basis of a partnership, you need to get a written partnership agreement and make sure that that is drafted to suit your particular partnership, isn't it? And deals with things like, well, if somebody dies, this is what will happen. So, for example, I have seen clauses in partnership agreements that provide that the remaining partners get a period of 10 years to pay out the dead partner's estate or the partner who's retired in equal instalments over that period of time. It says that it's going to be based on book value and not market value. So there's a big difference sometimes between those two. Market value is the market price at that time. Book value is the value in the accounts. And you know probably by looking at farming accounts, for those that do, the difference between book value and market value is often huge. So it's quite important to make sure that you've got clauses that enable this business to carry on, because very often in a farming partnership situation, you do want that business to carry on. What happens when somebody's ill? What happens when things go wrong, isn't it? So very easy to create, but really difficult when things go wrong. Okay, so you need to make sure you've got that partnership agreement in place. And here, you've got a new business created, haven't you? There's a new entity, essentially, isn't it? There's a new business created. There's a new trading name created, isn't there, yeah? So HMRC do need to be notified of that new business because you've got this partnership, which you'll have to do a partnership tax return for. Okay? But you're taxed as an individual. Okay, so this is not the partnership that gets taxed, it's you as an individual that get taxed within that partnership. And as well, to kind of get rid of another myth, partnership agreements do occur when you have got non-family members. Okay? I think that's something, because quite often you think of farming families as having partnership agreements, but we regularly do non-family member partnership agreements. What we may do differently with those is we may put a time limit on them. So we may say that partnership agreement will last for 10 years, then there will be a restock taken, and then they'll make a decision as to what happens after that. And it may be sell, it may be do other things, isn't it? You don't know. Oh, it's all there, look. Right, so Partnership Act 1890, written partnership agreement. This is really important as well. You need to be clear within your partnership agreement and within your partnership account who owns what. Okay? So you've got 3 things you need to allocate, essentially. How the profit and loss is going to be split. So who gets what percentage of that. And be aware that you sometimes make losses as well as profits, isn't it? And be aware that that means that you are not allowed necessarily to draw out the money that you think you might be able to draw in that particular year. Working capital then, that's your livestock, your dead stock, and your BPS entitlements value, essentially on a farm at the moment, yeah? So those would be your working capital items. And then you have your land capital. So if you've got a partner who owns land, it needs to be very clear that that land capital is not a partnership asset unless you want it to be. Okay? And I usually think of the difference between working capital and land capital as there being a double line between the two. Yeah, you do not want that line crossed unless you have specifically written a transfer property deed which says you want it to transfer to that person. You do not want it to happen by stealth. And what happens sometimes is if you get a mortgage for somebody and the partnership is paying the mortgage, but one person technically owns the land, over time, over 10, 15 years, all the partners own a bit of that land. But that might not have been the purpose. Okay, so it's really important to get this right. You can also have a limited liability partnership. Okay, And basically, this is a partnership that you register with Companies House. It is a new business, so again, you have to register with Companies House, you have to let HMRC know. And the benefit of it is that you can limit liability. With a partnership, your personal assets are at risk. It is joint and several liability, okay? But with a limited liability partnership, you are liable up to whatever capital you've got in that business or whatever you that you owe to that business. So again, you could have two businesses coming together or individuals from different places coming in to create a new LLP arrangement to fit that new business. The other option, if you want to create a new separate legal entity, is to create a limited company. And you need to think of a limited company as a person in its own right. It is a legal person in its own right. There is a new business being created. It has to be registered at Companies House. Again, HMRC will tax that limited company and it'll be taxed corporation tax. So you're no longer taxed on a personal basis. On this one, it's based on your personal tax situations. You're taxed as an individual. With a limited company pays corporation tax, depending on whatever the rate that is every year. And there are rules in terms of filing requirements. You have to file your accounts at Companies House. You have to make sure that you meet those return deadlines, otherwise you get fines, etc. And you have two main types of roles within limited companies. You have directors, and normally directors run the business, and then shareholders, and they are the owners of that business. Okay? And they could be one and the same. They don't have to be different people. They could be the same people. I could be a director and shareholder, and I'd be the only person. It doesn't have to be with somebody else, doesn't it? And people tend to want to create this separate legal entity because they're going into a new venture, which may be a little bit risky, and they want to make sure that it's in a separate legal identity to their own. Okay? You can have equity partnerships as well. And these, again, you're taxed on an individual basis. They're not registrable at Companies House, etc. Similar to partnerships, but it is to do with the equitable position of money going into the business and that being regarded as your capital stake within that business. The other option as well, just to complete the whole picture, so you think about all the different options, a farm business tenancy is the other option, isn't it? And I said earlier, if you don't want to farm, and you don't necessarily want to continue to live in the farmhouse, one of the best options is to rent the whole lot out, the farmhouse with the farmland, because you get APR on the whole lot. Issue with farm business tenancies, you have to pay rent, isn't it? And the market rent on some farm business tenancies are quite high as well, sometimes compared to what you might be able to return from them. Be aware as well there will be rent review provisions within those farm business tenancy options, but they can be good options in terms of inheritance tax planning for a farmer who wants to retire. So it can be a good option to look at. And also you can have them for different periods of time. So you could have one for 2 years to try it out first, and then you could go to a 5-year or a 10-year or move holdings from one holding to another as well. And then a longer term FBT, and I split these out because there are different requirements when you've got a longer FBT in terms of registration of that FBT, and also in terms of stamp duty land tax, which is now land transaction tax in Wales. So there are, you have to be aware that there are additional registration requirements on you if you've got a farm business tenancy and you are the tenant. It is the tenant's responsibility to register it, not the landlord's. And if you don't register it, there are implications in terms of that as well. Trusts. I must admit, I'm not a massive fan of trusts because they tend to be the cause of most of the disputes across my desk. But trusts can be useful sometimes in particular circumstances. So, for example, I've seen trusts set up where people want to leave their farms in trust for the benefit of a number of different beneficiaries, perhaps not knowing who might want to farm at a point in time. Or I've seen people leave farms in trust for the benefit of new entrants as well. So they want to see new entrants farming the land and to be offered the land, and they leave it in trust to be managed by trustees for that particular purpose. But you need to be careful about who the trustees are, who the beneficiaries are, and then who farms, and how the trust capital is maintained and looked after, and who gets the benefit of the income from that trust as well. So as I said, and you'd probably think typically as a lawyer, I'd think get it in writing, isn't it? But getting it in writing is really important because that's your backup plan. Hopefully you never have to look at it, okay? But if you get into trouble, then that is your backup plan if things go wrong. But also you need a practical backup plan as well in terms of what you might do if things don't work out the way that you think they're going to. What if you don't make a profit that you were expecting to make in accordance with the business plan? What is your backup plan at that stage? Isn't it? You need to have that backup plan in place. Be aware as well of all the development and planning permission requirements. You can have all fantastic ideas about what you might want to do, but you need to be planning ahead for what those bureaucratic requirements might be and how long sometimes that takes, as well as the costs of some of those procedures as well. And then making sure that you build in regular meetings and reviews with the people that you're in business with, because you need to make sure that you're keeping your business working in a practical sense. And then what I've done at the end here is I've set out what I would include, or what things I would think about if I was setting up a new enterprise, and what kinds of heads of terms you might want to consider with your business venture. So first thing is, what do you want? Yeah, be very clear about what you want at the beginning, isn't it? What do you want to achieve? What are your objectives? Where do you want to be in 10 years' time? This agreement might be for 2 or 3. Does this get you where you want to go in the end, isn't it? Is this the right building blocks to put in place for that purpose? And what is the purpose of the new venture for you? Yeah, so thinking about it, first of all, from your perspective, very much in terms of what you are looking to get out of it and what you would like to achieve. And then running through these different factors. So, are there any existing agreements that you need to be aware of? Are there any restrictions on what you can and cannot do on this holding? Are there any agreements that need to be dealt with before you can start your venture with the person that's there? So, for example, what if you came across a farm that already had a tenant on it, that had an FBT, that needed notice served on it, or needed that FBT brought to an end first, isn't it? Think about what implications that might have on you in terms of timing. The term of the agreement, how long you want it to last. There are no hard and fast rules on this. The only thing I would say is you probably need a year to allow that full kind of farming calendar cycle. But I have seen year-long agreements work perfectly fine, isn't it? Longest I've seen on a share farming is 10 years. Longest farm business tenancy I've seen is 50 years, much to the annoyance of the family involved. But there are lots of different options, okay, in terms of what that might look like. Who are the parties involved? Who are the key advisors? Who are your team? Who are going to support you through this process and make sure that you have got the right advice in place? So your bankers, accountants, listers, insurers, isn't it? Time spent and responsibilities and roles. A lot of arguments happen because there's no clarity about who's supposed to do what and when, isn't it? Yeah, building in provision for time off, etc. Operation of the business day-to-day decisions, isn't it? Do you need a meeting to decide this, or can these decisions be made without a meeting, isn't it? What are the operation of the business issues? Tax liability, business debts. There might be business debts that need to be serviced. There might be business debts that you might need to acquire in the future. What are those funding requirements going forward? Are there grants available, etc.? How are you going to deal with drawings? Are you going to agree what that amount is? Are you going to allow people to take what they want? Are you going to put caps on it? Yeah. Again, a source of arguments. Farming approach, what's your herd health plan? What's your farming policy? One of the things I think is very important at the outset when you're setting up your arrangement is to be clear about what your view is on animal health, and are you a person that likes to dose for this or not for that, or this, what I mean? What is your position in relation to that, isn't it? Business costs, viability, profitability. Hopefully your business plan will make those provisions clear. We've already talked about planning and development requirements. Capital input requirements. Who are your investors? Are you an investor? Have you got external investors? What security of use do you need for the land? Do you need a license? Do you need an FBT? Or is the license combined with a share farming arrangement enough for your purposes? Basic payment scheme, other grants available, capital grants as well as the agri-environment ones, other regulations, EIA. Lots of people are being caught out by this at the moment in terms of reseeding and ploughing, etc. Health and safety requirements. How are you going to settle disputes? Who is going to settle that dispute between you? And I would encourage you all to put a mediation clause in any agreement you do, Because hopefully, if you had a good relationship at the beginning, with a good mediator, you should be able to hammer out any differences you've got without having to resort to arbitration or the cost of people like me. How will the agreement come to an end as well? Is there a notice period requirement? Does it automatically come to an end on a particular date, etc.? So having all of these things discussed, considered and drawn up into a clear agreement as to where everybody stands. I hope that helps you, give you some ideas as to all the different structures available. Question there? Yeah?
Could I just check, please, is there anything to prevent a limited liability partnership or a limited company being one party to a share farming agreement? I'm guessing not, but no.
No, there isn't, no.
Thank you.
And actually it's quite common. It's quite common to have, one party being incorporated in some way, whether it was an LLP or a limited company, so yeah. What wasn't on the slides as well, the other option is a joint venture limited company, where you have two limited companies coming together, and I've seen that on dairy farms where they've taken a tenancy. So they've taken a tenancy of the farm on a joint basis, and then obviously they've got these two limited companies which have got other dairy farms that are running, coming together on that one holding. So it does, there are lots more options and variations of options that are on the screens, yeah? Any other questions?
Okay,
yeah.
So we've got a quick tea and coffee break now for about 15 minutes. Then you'll be moving then to your next workshop option. So just to remind you, the finance workshop is in the Conway room, which is the first room you come to down this corridor here, and the policy workshop is in the Denby room, which is the second room on your left. I've got here some literature. So I've got our venture handbook, which is something that we've put together with the Fresh Start Land Partnership Service in England. So it gives you, it's a bit of a guide really to the things you need to consider if you're thinking of setting up a joint venture. Nerys has also contributed to this handbook, and we have here information on all the different business structures, the legal structures that Nerys has been talking about today, and a bit of information on each of them. So feel free to take a copy of the handbook. I've also got the flyer that we produce every quarter with a list of the opportunities that we're advertising at the moment. So if somebody wants more information on any of these opportunities, you will need to enrol with the venture programme as a seeker. So fill in the profile, which is like your CV basically, and then you'll get the provider or the landowner's profile then. And then if both sides want to exchange contact details, you'll then go on and access the mentoring and get some facilitation then to start kind of building that relationship then. So yeah, feel free to come to the front before you go and grab your tea and coffee to get a copy of the list, or Sian is handing some of those handbooks out now. So there's 15 minutes now for tea and coffee, and we'll see you at your next